code 202-626-4898. You're watching Book TV, 48 hours of programs about books, authors, and the publishing industry, every weekend, here on C-SPAN 2. NBC News chief science correspondent Robert Bazell has written this book about Herceptin, a drug which can be used to treat certain kinds of breast cancer. He spoke about the book HER2 earlier this month at the Barnes & Noble at Rockefeller Center in New York City.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for coming this afternoon. Our guest today is Robert Bazell, chief science correspondent at NBC News, and he's written a book which is a dramatic account of a remarkable new breast cancer drug that really is paving the way for a very revolutionary new way of treating this disease. He'll be signing his book after he talks. Thank you for coming. I give you Robert Bazell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to Barnes & Noble for giving me this opportunity and displaying my book. It's been a great ego trip to walk from my office, which is 2 blocks away, down Fifth Avenue, and see my book in the window. I got interested in this book, in this topic, because of the reporting that I was doing for NBC News, which was about science and medicine, and I came upon this drug. And this is a drug that is going to help thousands of women with breast cancer, and it does it without the nausea and hair loss that we've come to associate with so many other cancer treatments. And that makes it important in itself. And then when I looked into this, I found that it's a topic that was a drug that had all these fascinating stories to do with it. Stories about the gigantic egos of researchers colliding with each other. Stories about how a biotechnology company functions, how it makes its decisions, and stories about how Hollywood money ended up making this book happen. So the book chronicles what is a very important moment in cancer research and treatment, is the development of this non-toxic, basically non-toxic therapy for cancer, as well as a lot of important stories that I hope people will find interesting and informative. And with that, I'm going to take some questions from the audience, and then we'll go on. Are there any questions from you folks? Yes, ma'am.
The question of the adverse effects on the heart when a person has chemo and is permitted to take the Herceptin, the blood test showing that protein on their cells, and then having heart problems that can be fatal also.
Well, this drug was thought to be completely non-toxic through much of its testing phases, and what happened was that Genentech, the company that makes it, switched gears in midstream because of the advice of a lot of oncologists, cancer specialists, who said that they should test it in an entirely different way. So that something happened that was very unusual in medicine, which was that the phase 3 trials, the final trials of a drug, ended up being very different from the phase 1 and 2 trials, which tested Herceptin either alone or in combination with a drug called cisplatin that's not usually used for breast cancer, but what turned out to be in a very effective combination. And what they discovered in the phase 3 trials, and it's a good example of why you need to do clinical trials, and you can't just, for any people who want to just put drugs on the market, this shows that that you need to test things. The drugs, it revealed that in combination with a certain kind of chemotherapy drug called anthracyclines, the well-known example is adriamycin, a very common breast cancer drug, that in combination with adriamycin, it accentuated a side effect that already exists with adriamycin, which is to cause heart muscle damage, and in the most extreme cases can cause heart failure. And that turned out to be a very significant side effect with that combination. Now, it's not something that needs to occur because the combination can be avoided. Now knowing about the combination, doctors can avoid giving women the combination, and it shouldn't be a problem in the future.
What is the generic name? Adriamycin?
Adriamycin is the name of the drug. It's a type of drug called an anthracycline. Any other question? Yes, ma'am.
Taking questions?
I'm taking questions. Yes.
Is there any optimum dose of the Herceptin? I am on a Herceptin trial now, and I'm getting 2 milligrams per kilogram.
Right.
Is this the
I think
commonly
doctors will
used
be experimenting with the drug because I think that the dose it was not well established again because of this a bit of a one of the things that was interesting about this drug was that there was a lot of missteps, and this drug could have been on the market 3 or 4 years ago, and it should have been on the market 3 or 4 years ago, but there was a lot of confusion, and one of the confusions was this design, which I detail in great length in the book, was the design of the clinical trials. And because they went from testing it in combination with one thing into testing it in combination with another, they're not really sure if they got the dose right. I think there'll be some playing around with the dose as doctors get to have more experience with it. So I can't answer that question, but I think that what the optimal dose is not exactly clear yet, although it's very clear that it can be effective, and I hope it's working for you. Yes, ma'am.
What about the older patient, the likelihood of blood showing up with the protein?
No, there seems to be no correlation with age. It's a mutation that occurs in about 20 to 30% of breast cancer patients have this mutation that causes their cells to produce excess amounts of this excess amounts of this protein on the cell surface called HER2, and those are the women whose cancers make them candidates for the treatment. That's about 20 to 30% of breast cancer patients, which is about 50 or 60,000 women a year in the United States. Yes, ma'am.
Herceptin doesn't work in all women. In some women, the cancer comes back. Some women die of the cancer, finally. Do you know about any research going on to sort of approve this first drug, Herceptin?
Oh, absolutely. I think
Yes.
that everybody who's involved with this wants to make it better. As you point out, like almost everything in medicine, it doesn't always work, and particularly things with cancer research, it doesn't always work. I mean, we've got to make sure to not make this into some miracle cure for cancer. It's a very important step, on the road for cancer treatment, to have a drug that is except for this heart problem, is free of side effects. But exactly why and which women respond and what combinations might make it work better is a subject of intensive research, which is continuing. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You've been reporting for a long time. What is it exactly that interested you in this particularly as opposed to something else?
The reason, that's a good question, because I came across this drug, and as I do many other things in my reporting for NBC, and the thing that interested me about this drug was it as a moment in cancer research treatment. This has been the holy grail of cancer research for a long time, to find a drug that fixes what's broken in a cancer cell. It's the first drug that was designed in a laboratory to target cancer cells without harming normal tissue. And people have been talking about doing that forever. And this is the first time it was achieved. So that made me sit up and take notice. And then when I realized that for medical history, I found all these interesting stories that went with it. The Hollywood money that went to making the drug, the conflicts between the scientists, the stop and go decisions about making the drug. So I decided that, hey, this might be really an interesting topic to go into in depth because it's got a lot of stories with it. And there's stories that in the area that interests me most, which is the place where science and medicine comes together with human lives. And I hope that this really.
Read the book yet?
Oh well, no. There's some of the women who, first of all, one of the things that was most important in this drug was the role of activists. Activists at the local level in San Francisco who demanded that Genentech give out the drug in a compassionate access program before it was approved by the FDA. Their struggle was a very important one. There was a couple women who died while they were waiting for the drug to be given to them, and their stories were very compelling. But more importantly, they ended up successful. And Genentech, first against its better judgment, but then decided to give out the drug. And ended up being very happy it did that. And actually, this has been done a lot with AIDS drugs. There's this thing called compassionate access, where you give out drugs to people before the drugs are approved by the FDA. But it hasn't been done before with cancer drugs. It was done briefly with Taxol by the federal government for a couple months before Taxol was approved in 1992. But it's something that was a big demand of AIDS activists, and the breast cancer activists picked up on it. Then there was a group of activists in Washington who were, Genentech went to them originally to try to blunt the effect of the activists who were in their own backyard, but the Washington activists, particularly the National Breast Cancer Coalition, wouldn't let that happen and say, no, we have our own demands. And one of the things that they did was they helped, with their demands, they helped straighten out the clinical trials so that Genentech ended up having a much better trial that ultimately attracted patients, because this trial almost died on the vine for lack of participation. And that raises another point that was very interesting. Almost every one of the women who were in the clinical trials for this drug that I profiled, that I met, had the privilege to meet, had to fight to get into the clinical trials. They heard about the trials not from their doctor. They heard about it from reading it in a magazine article or from a friend or on the internet, and then they had to fight to get into the trials, because it turns out that there's a big problem in this country with this thing called clinical trials, where only 3% of adult cancer patients in the United States are enrolled in clinical trials. And there are many cancer patients who want to be enrolled in clinical trials, who want to try something new, both for themselves and for the people down the line who are going to get cancer later. It's not for a lack of patients who want to be volunteers. It's because, as it turned out in this situation, a lot of oncology, cancer specialty, used to be concentrated in major medical centers, but in the last few years it's expanded, and as it's expanded, it's moved out into the community, so that a lot of cancer specialists practice in HMOs or practice in community settings, and they don't want to give up their patients to a clinical trial because they think it's a hassle. They become very cynical about new things working, and they lose the income, so they don't want to bother with this, and that's something that has to change. And that's one of the big demands of many cancer activists, both breast cancer and for other forms of cancer, is that clinical trial access be increased, because the way that these women had to fight to get into the clinical trials isn't the way it should be. People should be testing new things all the time. We're not going to have new drugs for breast cancer if we aren't testing them.
It went through already, September 25th or 28th, I forget.
Right.
It went through.
This drug has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. It's now available in hospitals and pharmacies. Anything else? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Do you know when it will be approved in Europe? I come from Germany and I have to stay here on this trial.
I'm really sorry to hear this.
Because it's not approved in Europe.
I don't know how the European Union pharmaceutical process works, because this drug was tested in Europe. There were clinical trials in Europe as well as in the United States, so that the
Information about this?
No, I don't have information.
Okay.
I could, Genentech, if you call them up, they might be able to give you that information. I don't think they'd be shy about it. Sure. Anyone else? Yes, Kendall.
What's really the difference between Herceptin and tamoxifen? Just because you read a lot about that
Right.
one too.
It's a good point. Tamoxifen is another drug that does what Herceptin was designed to do, although tamoxifen was discovered more by accident. It had been a birth control drug that didn't work and turned out to be a good cancer drug. Certain kinds of cancers have what are called estrogen receptor positive. That is, they have these things called receptors, proteins on their surface that are like antennae that take in the signal, in this case from estrogen, that tells them to grow and divide. And tamoxifen blocks that signal and stops the growth. HER2 is another receptor that takes in signals telling to grow and divide, so that women who are ER positive should be getting tamoxifen as their treatment. Women who are HER2 positive should be getting Herceptin. They tend not to be, tumors that are ER positive tend not to be HER2 positive, but it's not an exact correlation. The other part of this that, and I'll finish, and I think we'll start signing a few books or just chatting with people. The other part of this is that it was the Hollywood part that made this so interesting. That's not something that directly matters to patients, but this drug came onto the market because of a lot of battles. Like I said, it almost didn't happen. Genentech the company that makes it, almost abandoned the project 3 or 4 times and really wanted to. There was a few people in the company, though, that fought to keep it going. And one of them, it turned out, the most influential, was a man whose mother developed metastatic advanced breast cancer. And it was only when his mother developed the advanced breast cancer that he found out how few options were really available for women with the disease. And he he pushed the company to go ahead. The other factor that was really interesting to make this happen was a woman named Lily Tartikoff, who's described by many people as a force of nature. She's an incredibly strong, willful person. She was married to Brandon Tartikoff, who had been the head of NBC Entertainment. And this doctor, Dennis Slayman at UCLA, who played such a key role in developing this, had treated her husband for Hodgkin's disease, a kind of blood cancer, and she wanted to pay him back for all he had done. And he originally didn't want it. He said, no, you just pay your bills, but that's your only obligation. But no, she said no, she really wanted to pay him back, and she insisted over a period of years, and finally he gave in. And she went to Ronald Perlman here in New York, who is said to be the richest man in New York. He had just bought the Revlon Corporation, and she said to him, look, you make all this money off of selling cosmetics to women, you should pay back. And he agreed to that. To his credit, he agreed, but he's told her that she had to set up something called the Fire and Ice Ball, which has become this gala event second only to the Oscars in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And she did that, and she did it because she took her husband's Rolodex and she called up all these celebrities, and she called up all these studio executives and said to them, look, and at first, since charity is such a political thing, nobody wanted a new breast cancer charity, but she said to them, do you have mothers? Do you have daughters? Do you have sisters? Do they have breasts? I mean, that's how audacious she was, and she persisted with this and managed eventually to set up this event successfully, which has been going every year since 1990. And together, Perlman and Lily Tartikoff have raised $13 million for the UCLA research. And without that money, this wouldn't have happened. We've had this war on cancer now for 2 decades. And one of the things that's interesting about this drug is that it had nothing to do except for some very early research with that war on cancer. It was developed by this private money from Revlon and from the Fire and Ice Ball, and it was developed by the Genentech Corporation. So you're talking about private money doing a lot of good here. And I think we have to emphasize this is not a cure for breast cancer. God knows we wish it were. It's just a very important step on the road of progress because it is the first of what we hope is going to be many, many drugs that will have this non-toxic ability to home in on breast cancer or cancer cells and not harm normal cells in the body. So with that, I will, if there's no further questions, I will proceed to sign a few books here, and I'll come back to the mic if it's necessary. Is that okay? Okay, great. Possibly not. I think it's a very difficult question. Thank you very much. Where are you going to put it?
If you go to the right, just line up on the right side.
Thank you very much. Why don't we wait on those until, and then I'll be happy.